The arrival. The quantum displacement hit me like a freight train made of light and screaming mathematics. One moment I was in Dr. Hartley's laboratory, my hand hovering over the emergency shutdown button, watching the temporal rift spiral out of control. The next, I was face down in mud that smelled of diesel fuel, cordite, and death. I gasped, choking on air that tasted wrong, thick with smoke and something acrid that burned my lungs. My ears rang from a sound I hadn't heard yet, an echo of an explosion that physics said shouldn't exist. When I finally pushed myself up, my hands sank into cold European earth, and I knew immediately that everything had gone catastrophically wrong. The date display on my now cracked temporal navigator glowed a sickly green, October 23rd, 1942. No, 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 I whispered, frantically trying to recalibrate the device. This wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to observe from a safe temporal distance, gathering atmospheric data from the Second World War for climate research. I wasn't supposed to be here. I wasn't supposed to materialize in the middle of the North African desert on the exact night that would change the course of history forever. The Battle of El Alamein was about to begin. Thunder rolled across the horizon, except it wasn't thunder. It was artillery, British artillery, preparing for the massive offensive that would break Rommel's Afrika Korps and turn the tide of the entire Mediterranean campaign. I scrambled behind a rocky outcrop, my 21st century clothes completely out of place, my presence a paradox that could unravel causality itself. That's when I saw him. A young soldier, no more than 19, was crawling through the darkness about 50 yards from my position. His British uniform was torn, and even in the dim moonlight I could see the dark stains spreading across his side. He was trying to get back to his lines before the barrage started, but he was moving in the wrong direction, straight toward a German minefield. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to help him, but Dr. Hartley's words echoed in my mind. You cannot interact. You cannot change anything. History is not a book you can edit. It's a structure. Pull one thread and everything unravels. I watched, frozen, as the soldier dragged himself forward. 20 yards from the minefield, 15 yards. I couldn't do this. I couldn't just watch him die when 5 seconds of warning could save his life. My hand moved to my mouth before I could stop myself, ready to shout, ready to break every rule of temporal mechanics. Don't! The voice came from directly behind me and I nearly screamed. I spun around to find a man in a tattered German uniform crouched in the shadows of the rocks. But his eyes were wrong. They held a depth of knowledge, a weariness that didn't belong to this time. You're not from now, he said in perfect, accentless English. It wasn't a question. My blood turned to ice. Who are you? Someone who made your mistake 37 years ago. Well, 37 years from now. Temporal grammar is hell, isn't it? He moved closer, and I could see the temporal navigator, ancient, damaged, but unmistakable, strapped to his wrist. My name is Marcus Chen. I was a graduate student at MIT in 2019 when I got trapped here. I've been living in this war, in this nightmare, for 3 years. And if you warn that soldier, if you change even one death, you'll create a cascade that will make sure neither of our timelines ever exist. I looked back at the soldier. 10 yards from the minefield now. There has to be something we can do, I pleaded. There is, Marcus said grimly. We can watch, we can witness, we can remember, and we can try like hell to get you home before you become like me, a ghost haunting a war that ended before you were born. The British soldier reached the edge of the minefield. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't close my ears. The explosion, when it came, was smaller than I'd imagined, almost intimate in its horror. Marcus's hand gripped my shoulder. I'm sorry you had to see that, but that soldier's name was James Whitmore. He dies here tonight, in every timeline. I've tried to save him 11 times. 11 times I've created paradoxes that had to be corrected. Do you know what happens when the universe corrects a temporal paradox? I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. It picks someone at random from the affected area and deletes them, erases them from existence as if they never were. The first time I saved James, my grandmother disappeared from history. I was never born, except I was because I was protected by the temporal field. So I existed, but I didn't. I was a walking contradiction. He showed me his hands. They flickered sometimes, like a bad video signal. This is what happens when you become a paradox. You start to fade. Before I could respond, the night exploded. The British artillery barrage had begun, turning the desert into hell on earth. Thousands of guns opened fire simultaneously, their shells screaming overhead like the fury of angry gods. Marcus pulled me deeper into the rocks. We need to move. The German response is about to... The counter-barrage hit before he could finish. The ground erupted around us, and I found myself running through a nightmare landscape of fire and steel. Men were screaming in half a dozen languages. The air itself seemed to burn. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes, finally diving into what appeared to be an abandoned supply bunker half buried in the sand. Inside, lit by a single flickering lantern, were 3 other people in civilian clothes, all clutching damaged temporal navigators. "Welcome to the club," a woman with a Russian accent said bitterly. "I'm Svetlana. I'm from 2034. That's David from 2027, and the girl who won't stop crying is Lynn from 2041. "Wait," I gasped, struggling to process this. "You're saying there are multiple people trapped here? How is that possible?" Marcus slumped against the wall, his form flickering more noticeably in the lamplight. "The Battle of El Alamein. Something about this place this time creates temporal instabilities. It's like a magnet for failed time jumps. We think it's because this battle was such a crucial turning point, the moment when the Allies stopped losing and started winning in North Africa. The weight of historical significance creates ripples in space-time." David, a thin man with haunted eyes, spoke up. "We've been trying to find a way out for years, but every time we try to leave, something goes wrong. It's like the timeline won't let us go, and the more we exist here, the more we fade." He held up his arm. I could see through it like frosted glass. "How long do we have?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Svetlana looked at Marcus, then back at me. "Marcus has been here the longest, 3 years. He's maybe 60% solid on a good day. The rest of us, we have time, but not much." An explosion rocked the bunker, raining dust on our heads. Through the chaos I heard something that made my blood run cold. German voices close by, heading our way. "They do sweeps of the area looking for British scouts," Marcus whispered urgently. "If they find us, they'll think we're spies, and we can't let them capture our temporal navigators. Can you imagine what would happen if Nazi scientists got their hands on time travel technology in 1942? The voices were getting closer. We had maybe 30 seconds. "There's a tunnel," Lynn suddenly said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was young, frightened. "In the back. I found it yesterday. I think it connects to the supply lines." "Show us," I said. We crawled through darkness, the sounds of battle fading behind us, replaced by the scrape of our bodies against stone and the ragged sound of our breathing. When we finally emerged, we were in a larger chamber, and we weren't alone. A German officer stood in the center of the room, studying a map by candlelight. He looked up as we appeared, his hand moving toward his pistol, but then he stopped. His eyes widened as he took in our strange clothes, our impossible presence. "Zeitreisende," he whispered, "time travelers." And that's when I realized this nightmare was about to get much, much worse. The officer's secret. The German officer didn't draw his weapon. Instead, he did something far more unsettling. He smiled, sad and knowing, like a man who'd been expecting us. "Bitte, setzen Sie sich," he said quietly, gesturing to the crates scattered around the chamber. Then, switching to flawless English, "Please, sit. We don't have much time before the next patrol comes through." Marcus stepped protectively in front of our group, his flickering form casting strange shadows in the candlelight. "How do you know what we are?" The officer, his insignia marked him as a Hauptmann. A captain, carefully set down his pistol and rolled up his left sleeve. There, strapped to his wrist beneath a makeshift leather covering, was a temporal navigator. It was older than any I'd seen, the technology almost primitive, but unmistakable. "My name is Wilhelm Adler," he said, his voice carrying the weight of unspeakable exhaustion. "And I am from the year 1987. I've been trapped in this war for 45 years. The number hit me like a physical blow. 45 years. I looked at him more carefully now. He appeared to be in his 60s, but if he'd arrived as a young man in 1897... The math made my head spin. "That's impossible," Svetlana breathed. "No one could maintain temporal cohesion for that long. You should have faded completely decades ago." Wilhelm's laugh was bitter. "Should have, yes, but I discovered something the rest of you haven't yet. There's a way to anchor yourself to this timeline, to stop the fading." He paused, and the pain in his eyes was almost unbearable. "But the cost is everything you were, everything you could have been." "What did you do?" I asked. The part of me didn't want to know. "I became part of history instead of just witnessing it," Wilhelm said. "I stopped trying to avoid interaction. I joined the Wehrmacht, rose through the ranks, lived a life here. I married a woman from this time. I had children. And with every connection I made, every relationship I built, I became more real here and less real there. My timeline, 1987, the fall of the Berlin Wall, everything I knew. It's like a dream now, fading, but I'm solid here. I won't disappear." David's voice shook. "You helped the Nazis. You fought for them." Wilhelm's face hardened. "I survived, and I tried in my own small ways to limit the damage. There are 3 Jewish families in Berlin who are alive right now because I lost certain documents. There are British prisoners who weren't executed because I intervened. Don't you dare judge me for doing what I had to do to stay alive in hell." An explosion somewhere above us rattled the chamber, dust raining down. The battle was intensifying. "Why are you telling us this?" Marcus demanded. "What do you want?" Wilhelm pulled out a worn notebook, its pages covered in complex equations and diagrams. "Because I've spent 45 years studying the temporal anomaly that's trapping us here, and I think I've finally found a way out, but not for me, for you, for all of you. But it requires doing something that goes against everything we were taught about temporal mechanics." He spread several pages across a crate, revealing calculations that made my physicist's brain reel. The Battle of El Alamein creates a temporal loop, a closed, time-like curve. Every attempt to leave simply brings you back to the moment you arrived, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, but always back. It's why none of you have escaped. "We figured out that much," Svetlana said impatiently. "What's your solution?" "You have to break the loop by changing something significant enough to create a new timeline branch. A divergence point that allows you to slip through before the paradox correction catches up." The implications crashed over me. "You're talking about deliberately altering history that could destroy everything." "It will destroy a timeline," Wilhelm corrected. "But timelines are more resilient than we thought. I've observed 17 paradoxes over the years, and reality adapts. It creates parallel branches. The question is whether you're willing to orphan yourselves from your original timeline to escape this trap. Lynn, who'd been silent, suddenly spoke up. What kind of change? What would we have to do? Wilhelm's expression grew grave. Tomorrow night, Field Marshal Rommel will be at a specific location, reviewing defensive positions. His death here now would change the entire trajectory of the North African campaign, possibly the entire war. I can get you close enough to— Absolutely not! I cut him off, horrified. We're not assassins, we're scientists. You're survivors, Wilhelm shot back. Or you will be, if you want to live. Because I need to tell you something else, something I've learned from watching others like us fade away. When you disappear, when you finally lose cohesion, you don't just cease to exist. The temporal paradox creates a kind of echo, a screaming moment of non-existence that ripples backward and forward through your entire lifeline. Everyone you ever knew experiences a moment where they remember you never existing. It's agony and it's contagious. Svetlana had gone pale. You're saying our families would experience the psychic trauma of losing you across all moments simultaneously? Yes. Wilhelm's voice was gentle now, sympathetic. I've felt it happen. 17 times. It's like a scream that only exists in memory. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. The chamber fell silent except for the distant thunder of artillery. I looked at my companions, Marcus barely holding his form together, Svetlana calculating odds behind her sharp eyes, David trembling with fear and indecision, Lynn so young, too young to be trapped in this nightmare. There has to be another way, I said desperately. There is. A new voice called from the tunnel entrance. We all spun around to find a British soldier emerging from the shadows, but his uniform was wrong. The camouflage pattern wouldn't be invented for decades. He held up his hands peacefully, revealing his own temporal navigator. My name is James Whitmore, and before you ask, yes, I'm the grandson of the man you watched die tonight. Marcus staggered backward. That's impossible. He died. I saw him die. We all did. In this timeline, yes, James said. But I'm from a branch timeline where he survived because someone, a flickering man who appeared and disappeared like a ghost, pulled him away from that minefield at the last second. That someone was you, Marcus, or rather, a future version of you, from a timeline that hasn't happened yet. My head was spinning. This is insane. The paradoxes are stable, James interrupted. That's what I came back to tell you. The multiverse theory is correct. Every change creates a new branch, and those branches are real, persistent, stable. Wilhelm is right about one thing. You can escape, but he's wrong about another. You don't have to kill anyone. You just have to make a choice to act, to embrace the change, and the timeline will split. You'll slide into the new branch, and the loop will release you. Wilhelm was shaking his head. I've tried small changes. They don't create enough temporal momentum because you were trying to minimize your impact, James said. You were trying to change things while still holding on to the idea that you didn't belong here. You have to commit fully. Choose this moment, this time, and make it yours. Another explosion, much closer this time. We could hear German voices shouting, the sounds of soldiers mobilizing. We need to decide now, Svetlana said urgently. Whatever we're going to do. I looked at each of them. These accidental time travelers, these ghosts haunting a war they'd never meant to touch. Then I thought about my own time, my own life. Dr. Hartley would be frantically trying to retrieve me. My sister would be worried. My work, my world, everything I knew. But here now, I had the power to save lives, real lives. The soldier Marcus had watched die. I could ensure he lived, at least in some timeline. The families Wilhelm had protected, I could help protect more. The course of history didn't have to be a sacred, untouchable thing. It could be a choice. I know what we have to do, I said quietly, and it's not assassination, it's salvation. Marcus looked at me with those sad, flickering eyes. What are you thinking? There's a field hospital about 2 kilometers from here, I said, the plan forming as I spoke. British forces are about to advance through a sector they think is clear, but intelligence is wrong. There's a hidden German machine gun nest. 27 soldiers are going to die in the first wave. I know, because I read the after-action reports in my research. And you want to warn them? David asked. More than that, I want us to take out that machine gun nest ourselves. With our knowledge of what's coming, we can save those lives. And that act, that choice to fully engage with this moment, that will be enough to break the loop. Wilhelm was staring at me with something like hope. It might work. The temporal mathematics. Forget the mathematics, I said. This is about being human, about choosing to matter. Lynn stood up, her young face set with determination. I'm in. I didn't study temporal physics to be a passive observer. I wanted to change the world. Well, here's my chance. One by one they nodded. Even Marcus, who'd spent so long trying not to interfere, straightened his flickering form and said, "Okay, let's save some lives." James Whitmore smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. I brought equipment." He pulled out a pack that seemed far too large to have fit through the tunnel. Advanced medical supplies, intelligence on German positions, and something else, a one-time temporal anchor. When you make your move, activate this. It will lock you into the new timeline branch and prevent the paradox backlash. Wilhelm reached for his pistol, not to threaten, but to check it. Then I suppose I'm about to commit the ultimate treason, helping the enemy. My commanders would shoot me if they knew. They won't know, Svetlana said, because we're going to make sure this looks like dumb luck and British competence, not sabotage. As we prepared to leave, James pulled me aside. You should know, the timeline you're creating, the branch you're sliding into, it's not going to be exactly like the one you left. There will be differences, small ones at first, but they compound. Are you ready for that? I thought about it, really thought about it. Then I nodded. I'd rather live in a world I helped make better, even if it's not the one I knew, than fade away into nothing. Good, he said, because the truth is, there's no going home. There never was. The moment you arrived here, you became part of this moment. The only question was whether you'd accept it or fight it until you disappeared. The reality of it settled over me. I was never going back to 2024. But maybe, just maybe, I could build something worth having here in whatever timeline we were about to create. We moved out into the burning night, 7 time travelers about to change the course of history. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I wasn't afraid. The point of no return. The desert night was chaos incarnate. Artillery shells screamed overhead in both directions, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that had no business being beautiful. We moved like shadows between the explosions, 7 people who didn't belong in 1942, carrying equipment that wouldn't be invented for decades, about to rewrite reality itself. James led us through a maze of wadis and rocky outcrops, somehow navigating terrain that looked identical in every direction. The machine gun nest is in a destroyed Italian bunker, he whispered, consulting a device that looked like a hybrid of a GPS and a temporal scanner. 3 soldiers, Klaus Bergmann, Otto Fischer, and Hans Meyer. In the original timeline, they killed 27 British soldiers before a tank finally takes them out. 3 men, David said, his voice hollow. We're going to kill 3 men. We're going to save 27, Svetlana corrected sharply. Don't lose sight of that. But Wilhelm shook his head. We don't have to kill anyone. I know these men. I served with Bergmann's unit 2 years ago. They're conscripts, not fanatics. If we approach correctly, if I speak to them. He trailed off, and I could see the weight of his 45 years in this nightmare pressing down on him. Let me try to get them to surrender first. Marcus, whose form was now barely substantial in the darkness, grabbed Wilhelm's arm, or tried to, his flickering hand passing partially through. That's a huge risk. If they sound an alarm, then we do it the hard way, Wilhelm said grimly. But I've spent 45 years compromising my soul to survive in this uniform. Let me do one thing that's purely good before this is over. I made the decision, though I had no right to. We try it Wilhelm's way first, but we go in ready. James, can that equipment of yours work non-lethally? He nodded, pulling out devices that looked like tasers crossed with something from a science fiction movie. Electromagnetic pulse stunners. They'll drop someone for about 20 minutes, no permanent damage. I brought them hoping we wouldn't have to kill anyone. Optimist, Svetlana muttered, but she took one of the weapons. We approached the ruined bunker with agonizing slowness. Every shadow could hide an enemy patrol. Every sound could be our discovery. The British barrage had momentarily paused. They'd be advancing soon, moving into the killing zone. Through a crack in the bunker's shattered wall, I could see them, 3 young men, barely older than Lynn, huddled around a MG-34 machine gun. They looked terrified, exhausted, just trying to survive until dawn. One of them, Bergman, I assumed, was looking at a photograph by the light of a shielded candle. Wilhelm stood, straightening his uniform, and walked openly toward the bunker entrance. The rest of us held our breath, weapons ready. "Bergman," Wilhelm called in German, "it's Hauptmann Adler. I need to speak with you." The response was immediate. The sound of rifles being cocked, harsh voices demanding identification. Wilhelm answered calmly, giving codes and unit designations that must have been correct because the tension eased slightly. "What are you doing here, Hauptmann?" A young voice called out. "This sector is supposed to be clear of officers." "That's what I need to talk to you about," Wilhelm said, and there was something in his voice. Command, yes, but also desperate sincerity. "The British know you're here. They have tanks moving into position. You're not going to slow down their advance. You're just going to die, and for nothing." Silence. Then, "Are you ordering us to abandon our post?" Wilhelm closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were filled with a resolve I'd never seen before. "No, I'm asking you, as someone who's seen how this war ends, to choose life. Take your weapons, fall back to the secondary line, and report that this position was overrun. You'll live. Your families will see you again. That photograph you're holding, Klaus, is that your son?" A sharp intake of breath from inside the bunker. "How did you—" "Because I know what it's like to be separated from family by circumstances beyond your control," Wilhelm said, and his voice cracked. "I know what it's like to wonder if you'll ever see them again. I'm giving you a chance that I wish someone had given me. Take it, please." The moment stretched out, brittle as glass. Then the bunker door opened, and 3 young soldiers emerged. Hands raised, weapons left behind. Bergman, barely 25, stared at Wilhelm, with tears streaming down his face. "I don't know why you're doing this, Hauptmann, or how you knew about my son, but thank you." Wilhelm nodded, unable to speak. He just gestured for them to go, to run, to live. As they disappeared into the darkness, James activated his temporal scanner and swore softly. "Timeline fluctuation detected. The branch point is forming. But we need more. This change alone isn't enough to break the loop." "The British advance," I said suddenly. "They're still going to walk into danger. There are mines, other defensive positions. We need to warn them." "Now you're thinking," Marcus said, and even though his form was barely visible, I could hear the smile in his voice. "We don't just prevent one tragedy. We cascade the change, make it impossible for the timeline to snap back." Svetlana was already moving. "There's a British forward observation post 1/2 kilometer south. If we can reach them before the advance—" The explosion cut her off, not nearby. This one was distant but significant. We all turned toward the sound, and James's face went white as he checked his scanner. No, that's not supposed to happen yet. That's the ammunition depot at—" He stopped, recalculating frantically. "The timeline is already shifting. Our intervention with Bergman created a butterfly effect. A supply truck took a different route, hit a mine that was supposed to be cleared tomorrow." "Is that bad?" Lynn asked, fear creeping into her voice. It's unpredictable, James said. The new timeline is forming around us, but we're caught in the transition. We need to complete our intervention, get to those British soldiers, give them the intelligence they need, and activate the temporal anchor, all before the paradox correction realizes we're causing this. We ran. There's no other word for it. We ran through a battlefield that was actively rewriting itself around us. I saw things that made no sense. A tank that flickered between being destroyed and being intact. A building that existed and didn't exist simultaneously. A soldier who walked past us twice on two different paths, both versions equally real. The British observation post was a hastily dug trench with 3 soldiers inside, looking shell-shocked and young. When we appeared out of the darkness, their rifles came up instantly. "Don't shoot!" I shouted in English. "We have intelligence. There are defensive positions ahead. Coordinates 31, 8456 north, 28, 9567 east. Machine gun nests, mines, artillery spotters. If your forces advance on the planned route, casualties will be catastrophic." The sergeant, his name tape read Mitchell, stared at us like we were ghosts, which I supposed we were. "Who the hell are you? How do you know those coordinates?" Marcus stepped forward, his flickering form now impossible to ignore even in the darkness. "It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is that you radio back to command right now and redirect the advance. Save your men, Sergeant. That's all that matters." Mitchell's eyes were wide, but he was a soldier. He'd seen strange things in war, and maybe, just maybe, he chose to believe. He grabbed his radio and started transmitting coordinates, warnings, intelligence that should have been impossible for us to have. James pulled out the temporal anchor, a device about the size of a softball, covered in lights and incomprehensible symbols. "This is it. Once I activate this, we lock into whatever timeline we've just created. There's no going back, no second chances. Everyone understand?" We nodded, one by one. Even Wilhelm, who'd lived in this war for 45 years, nodded. "I just want to say," David spoke up, his voice stronger than I'd heard it before, "that I'm glad I got trapped with all of you. If I had to break the universe, I'm glad I did it with people who wanted to save lives." Lynn laughed, almost giddy with fear and hope. "We're either heroes or the biggest idiots in the multiverse." "Probably both," Svetlana said dryly. "Do it, James." He pressed the activation sequence. The device began to glow, brighter and brighter, and I felt something fundamental shift in the fabric of reality. It was like the universe took a deep breath, considered what we'd done, and then chose to allow it. The loop shattered. I could feel it break, like a chain snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. The sensation was indescribable, relief and terror and freedom all at once. Marcus suddenly became solid again, fully present, and he stared at his hands in wonder. Svetlana gasped as color returned to her face, the fading reversed. David laughed, a sound of pure joy. But then the sky split open, not literally, but that's what it looked like. A rift in space-time, a wound in reality itself, and through it I could see everything, every possible timeline, every choice made and unmade, every version of this moment playing out simultaneously. I saw timelines where we succeeded, where we failed, where we never existed at all. And I saw something else, a figure watching from the other side of the rift. Dr. Hartley. But not my Dr. Hartley. An older version, wearing equipment I didn't recognize, and beside him were dozens of others, all with temporal navigators, all watching us. "The first successful branch jump," Hartley's voice echoed across dimensions. "We've been trying to reach you, to pull you back, but you did something we never thought possible. You didn't fight the paradox. You embraced it. You created something new." "Are we trapped here?" I called back, not sure if he could hear me. "No," Hartley said, and he was smiling. You're free. The loop is broken. You can go anywhere in this new timeline you've created. Forward to your own time, backward to any point you choose. The question is, where do you want to go? I looked at my companions. Marcus, solid and real for the first time in 3 years. Wilhelm, tears streaming down his face as he held a photograph that had just appeared in his hands. His children, alive in this new timeline, waiting for him. Svetlana, David, and Lynn, all staring at the impossible choice before us. "We changed history," Lynn whispered. "We saved those soldiers. But what else did we change? What world are we returning to?" James checked his scanner one last time. The divergence is stable. The major historical events remain largely intact. The Allies still win at El Alamein. The war still ends in 1945. But the details. 27 soldiers who died now live. They have families, children, futures. The ripples spread forward, but gently. It's a better timeline. Not perfect, but better. Sergeant Mitchell was staring at us, his radio forgotten. "What are you people?" I smiled at him. "Just travelers trying to find our way home. The intelligence we gave you, use it well. And when this war is over, live a good life. That's all any of us can do." The rift was closing. We had seconds to decide. "I'm going forward," Marcus said suddenly, "to 2025. My timeline doesn't exist anymore, but this new one does. I want to see what kind of world we made." "I'm staying here," Wilhelm said quietly. "In this timeline, my family is real. They're waiting for me in Berlin. I have a chance to actually be a father, to leave this war behind and build something good. I'm taking it." One by one, we made our choices. Svetlana wanted to go back to 2034 and see if her work still existed. David chose 2027 to find out if the climate crisis he'd been studying was better or worse in this new branch. Lynn decided to go to 2045 to see the world 50 years after she was born, in a timeline she'd helped create. And me? I looked at the rift, at Dr. Hartley waiting on the other side, at the chance to return to something like my old life. Then I looked at Sergeant Mitchell and his men, at the lives we'd just saved, at the war still raging around us. "I'm staying too," I said. "Not here in 1942, but close, 1945. I want to see the end of this war, to witness the peace we helped make possible, and then I'll decide where to go next." James nodded approvingly. "The rift will remain accessible to all of you. You're not trapped anymore. You're free to move through the timeline, to live where and when you choose. That's what breaking the loop gave you, temporal citizenship. Welcome to the multiverse." The rift closed, and we were alone in the desert with 3 very confused British soldiers. "So," Mitchell said after a long moment, "you lot fancy a cup of tea while we wait for the advance? Because I have a feeling I'm going to need something strong before I try to explain you to my commanding officer." We laughed, all of us, and it felt like coming back to life after being dead. We'd broken every rule of temporal mechanics, rewritten history itself, and somehow survived. Now we just had to figure out how to live with what we'd done. The weight of consequences. 3 days after breaking the temporal loop, I stood on a ridge overlooking the battlefield as dawn broke over El Alamein. The second battle was in its final stages, November 4th, 1942. Montgomery's forces had broken through, and Rommel's Afrika Korps was in full retreat. But this wasn't the battle I'd read about in history books. The casualties were different, not dramatically so. The Allies still won decisively, but the numbers had shifted. Those 27 British soldiers we'd saved had fought in subsequent engagements. 16 of them survived the entire North African campaign. The intelligence we'd provided had altered patrol routes, changed tactical decisions, saved lives in ways we couldn't have predicted. Sergeant Mitchell found me there, watching the sun paint the desert gold. He'd aged years in 3 days, the way all soldiers do in combat, but he was alive, and so were most of his men. "You're still here," he said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "I half convinced myself you lot were hallucinations, battle fatigue, you know. But then Command confirmed the intelligence you gave us. Perfect accuracy. Impossible accuracy." He looked at me sideways. "You going to tell me how you knew? Would you believe me if I did?" He laughed, a rough sound. "At this point, I'd believe just about anything. I've seen men disappear and reappear, watched a tank exist in 2 places at once, and met people who glow in the dark. This war's already mad. Why not add time travelers to the list?" I told him everything. I don't know why. Maybe because he'd earned the truth by believing us when it mattered. Or maybe because I needed someone from this time to understand what we'd done, what we'd risked. He listened in silence, his cigarette burning down to ash between his fingers. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My brother died at Dunkirk," he finally said. "2 years ago. I've spent every day since wondering if there was something, anything that could have saved him. And now you're telling me that time can be changed, that death isn't always final." His voice broke. "Do you have any idea what that means to someone like me?" "I do," I said softly. "And I'm sorry, because the answer is yes. It could have been changed, but not by us, not now. We can't go back to your brother's moment. We're locked into this timeline now, moving forward from October 1942. The past, before our intervention, is fixed." "But somewhere," Mitchell said, grasping at hope, "somewhere in some other timeline, maybe he lived." "Maybe," I admitted. "The multiverse is infinite. There are timelines where he survived, where the war never happened, where everything turned out differently, but they're not this timeline. This is the one we made. For better or worse." He nodded slowly, crushing out the cigarette. "For what it's worth, those 27 men you saved, they have families waiting for them, children who'll grow up with fathers. That's something. That's not nothing." "It's everything," I said. "It has to be." Wilhelm found me later that day, standing in the ruins of the bunker where we'd first made our choice. He looked different, lighter somehow, despite the German uniform he still wore. "I'm going to Berlin," he announced, "as soon as I can arrange transport. In this timeline, my wife, Martha, she's alive. My children are alive. They think I've been away on assignment. I can go home." His voice cracked on the last word. "After 45 years, I can finally go home." "What will you tell them?" I asked. "About where you've been, what you've done." "The truth eventually, but first I'm just going to hold them and remember what it feels like to be human instead of a ghost." He paused. "You could come forward with me, to 1945 like you planned. See how it all turns out." I shook my head. "Not yet. Marcus and I decided to stay here for a while, to observe the immediate aftermath of our intervention. Make sure the timeline is stable, that we didn't accidentally make things worse. And if you did, then we figure out how to fix it," I said with more confidence than I felt. "That's the burden we took on when we broke the loop. We're responsible now." Wilhelm clasped my shoulder. "You're a good person, better than I've been. Promise me something. Don't lose that. Don't let this war this time turn you into what I became. Stay human." "I promise," I said, and meant it. The next weeks passed in a strange blur. Marcus and I moved through the aftermath of El Alamein like anthropologists studying an alien culture, except the culture was human history reshaping itself around our intervention. We found the soldiers we'd saved, met them, spoke with them, learned their stories. Private James Crawford, who'd have died on October 25th in the original timeline, was now planning to propose to a nurse he'd met in Cairo. Corporal Michael O'Brien was writing letters home to his 3-year-old daughter, telling her about the desert and promising to teach her to swim when he got back. Lieutenant Anthony Price was studying Arabic in his spare time, dreaming of returning after the war as a diplomat. Each life we'd saved had rippled outward, touching dozens of other lives. Crawford's future children, O'Brien's daughter growing up with a father, Price's diplomatic career that might prevent future conflicts, but there were costs too. In the original timeline, a German officer named Friedrich Schultz had been killed by Crawford on October 25th. Now Crawford survived, but so did Schultz. And Schultz went on to participate in operations that resulted in Allied casualties later in the campaign. 3 British soldiers died who wouldn't have in the original timeline. 3 for 27, Marcus said when we discovered this. His form was solid now, permanent, but the weight in his voice was heavier than when he'd been fading. That's still a net positive, right? That's still worth it? I don't know, I admitted. How do you weigh lives like that? How do you decide who deserves to live and who deserves to die? You don't, a new voice said. We turned to find Lynn standing behind us. She'd said she was going forward to 2045, but here she was, back in 1942. You just make the best choice you can in the moment and live with the consequences. What are you doing here? Marcus asked. I thought you left. I did. I went to 2045, saw the world we'd made. Her face was strange, wonder mixed with horror. It's different. Not massively, but in 1,000 small ways. The war still ended in 1945. The Cold War still happened, but the details. A scientist who died at El Alamein in the original timeline lived in ours. He went on to work on the Manhattan Project. The atomic bombs dropped on Japan were 15% more powerful. The implications hit me like a physical blow. How many more people died? About 8,000, Lynn said quietly. But the war in the Pacific ended 3 days earlier, which saved an estimated 12,000 Allied lives and 20,000 Japanese civilians who would have died in conventional bombing. Plus, the scientists' post-war work contributed to nuclear power technology that's currently supplying energy to 2 million people. So we saved lives and took lives, Marcus said. We prevented some suffering and caused other suffering. We changed things, Lynn corrected, and change is never clean, it's never simple. But I came back to tell you that the world of 2045 in our timeline, it's not worse, it's not better, it's just different. And the people living in it, they're happy, sad, struggling, thriving, just like people in any timeline. We didn't break the world. We just shifted it. I sat down heavily on a piece of rubble. Is this what time travel was always going to be? Impossible moral calculus and the weight of playing God? Probably, Lynn said, sitting beside me. But here's what I realized in 2045. Every human being plays God in small ways every day. Every choice we make creates ripples. Every kindness prevents some suffering and potentially causes other suffering downstream. The only difference is that we can see the consequences of our choices playing out across decades. Most people don't have that curse. Or blessing, Marcus added thoughtfully. We know our actions mattered. How many people go through life wondering if they made any difference at all? On November 11th, 1942, the Battle of El Alamein officially ended. The Axis forces were in full retreat across North Africa. The tide of the war had turned, just as it had in the original timeline. But in this version, there were specific soldiers alive who'd been dead, specific families intact who'd been shattered, specific moments of joy that had replaced moments of grief. Sergeant Mitchell found us one last time before his unit moved out. I wanted to thank you, he said, all of you. I don't fully understand what you did or why, but I know 27 of my brothers in arms are alive because of it. That means something. It means everything, I said, echoing my words from days before. He pulled out a piece of paper, a photograph, creased and worn. This was taken yesterday. All of us, the men you saved, we wanted you to have it, so you'd remember that whatever else happened, whatever complicated consequences there were, these men lived. These men got to go home. I took the photograph with shaking hands. 27 faces, dirty and exhausted, but smiling, alive. I memorized every one of them. "Thank you," I whispered. After Mitchell left, the three of us, Marcus, Lynn and I, stood in the desert as the sun set over El Alamein one last time. "So what now?" Lynn asked. "Where do we go from here?" "Forward," Marcus said. "That's all we can do. Move forward through this timeline we made and try to do more good than harm." "I'm going to 1945, I decided. I want to see the end of this war, bear witness to it. And then maybe I'll find a place in the post-war world, use my knowledge to help rebuild, to create something good." "I'm going back to 2045, Lynn said. "But I'm not going to hide what I am anymore. I'm going to find other time travelers. And I know they're out there now, and build a community, share knowledge, figure out how to use this power responsibly." "And I'm going to 2025, Marcus added. "The year I should have returned to in a timeline I helped create. I want to see what kind of world exists there. Maybe teach temporal physics, if anyone will believe me." We stood together in silence. Three people who'd broken the universe and somehow survived. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Lynn asked quietly. I looked at the photograph of 27 living men, thought about the three who died instead, considered the atomic scientist and the extra casualties and the shifted timeline and the infinite complexity of cause and effect. "I think we did a human thing," I said finally. "We saw suffering and tried to stop it. We made mistakes, we caused unintended consequences, but we acted with compassion and courage, and we're willing to live with the results. That's all anyone can do." "Even time travelers?" Marcus asked with a slight smile. "Especially time travelers." As the last light faded from the desert sky, we activated our temporal navigators one final time, each setting our own course through the timeline we'd created. The rift opened, showing us the paths ahead, all the possible moments waiting to be lived. Before we stepped through, Lynn grabbed our hands. "Whatever happens," she said, "whatever we face in our respective times, we did this together. We changed history together, and that's something no one can ever take away from us." "The time travelers of El Alamein," Marcus said with a grin. "We should get t-shirts made." We laughed, really laughed, for the first time since this nightmare began. Then, together, we stepped into our futures. I emerged in May 1945 in a small town in France, just as the war in Europe was ending. The celebration in the streets was overwhelming, people crying, laughing, embracing strangers. Peace, finally, after years of horror. I stood in the crowd, anonymous and invisible, just another displaced person in a displaced world. But I was smiling because I knew something they didn't. Somewhere in this crowd were people who were alive because of choices made 3 years ago in a desert by a group of time travelers who refused to be passive observers. The weight of what we'd done would never fully leave me. The moral complexity, the unintended consequences, the lives saved and lives lost, it would all stay with me forever. But as I watched the celebration, watched humanity choosing joy after surviving the worst it could do to itself, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would make the same choice again, every time, because some nightmares are worth entering if it means pulling someone else out of the darkness. And that's what made us human. Not our temporal technology, not our knowledge of history, but our willingness to risk everything to save people we'd never met. 1942 had been my nightmare, but it had also been my salvation. And now I had the rest of time to figure out what to do with that gift. The Echo of Choice. Berlin, Germany. April 1947. I stood in the rubble of what had once been a cafe, watching Wilhelm play with his grandchildren in a park that had been cleared from the ruins. 2 years had passed since the war ended, and the world was slowly, painfully rebuilding itself. Wilhelm saw me and waved, his face splitting into a genuine smile. He looked younger than when I'd first met him in 1942, despite being 5 years older. Freedom did that to a person, lifted decades of weight from their shoulders. "They're beautiful," I said when he approached, gesturing to the children playing among the resurrected flower beds. "They're miracles," Wilhelm corrected softly. "In the original timeline, they never existed. My son died at Stalingrad, my daughter in a bombing raid. But here they lived. They met people, fell in love, built families." His eyes glistened. "Every morning I wake up wondering if I deserve this gift." "You saved lives at El Alamein," I reminded him. "You chose compassion over duty. That counts for something. Does it balance out the 3 years I spent wearing this uniform, following orders, participating in?" He couldn't finish. "I keep detailed records, you know. Every person I helped, every document I lost, every order I delayed or sabotaged. I need to remember that I tried, that I wasn't just—" "You were human," I interrupted. "Trapped in an impossible situation, doing the best you could. That's all any of us can do." We sat on a broken wall, watching children play in a city that had been bombed into near oblivion just 2 years ago. The resilience of humanity never ceased to amaze me. "Have you heard from the others?" Wilhelm asked. I nodded. "Marcus sent a letter from 2025, the world there is." I paused, searching for words. "Strange, familiar but different. He said the internet exists, but it developed differently. Social media has different names, different companies. The climate crisis is slightly better because of green energy innovations from scientists who lived in our timeline, but died in the original one. And the bad differences. There are those too," I admitted. "A regional conflict in Southeast Asia that didn't happen in the original timeline, a pandemic in the 2010s that was slightly worse. But Marcus says the total human suffering across the timeline seems roughly equivalent. We didn't create paradise or hell, just a different path through the same fundamental challenges." Lynn, she founded something she calls the Temporal Reconciliation Project in 2045, a network of time travelers helping each other cope with the moral weight of our interventions. Apparently, there are hundreds of us scattered across different time periods, all trying to figure out if we did the right thing. Wilhelm was quiet for a long moment. And did we do the right thing? I pulled out a worn photograph, the one Sergeant Mitchell had given me at El Alamein. 27 faces, dirty and exhausted, but alive. I'd carried it through the rest of the war, through VE Day celebrations, through the 2 years since. "I tracked them down," I said. "All 27. Want to know what happened to them?" Wilhelm leaned forward, intent. "James Crawford married that nurse. They have 3 children now. He's working as a school teacher in Manchester, teaching history, ironically enough. Michael O'Brien did get to teach his daughter to swim. She's 7 now, and he says she's fearless in the water. Anthony Price became a diplomat, just like he dreamed. He's part of the team working on rebuilding Europe, on preventing another war." I went through the entire list. Farmers and factory workers, writers and engineers, fathers and sons, each building a life in the post-war world. Lives that wouldn't have existed without our intervention. "But there's more," I continued, my voice dropping. "Those 3 soldiers who died because we saved Crawford, I found their families too. Friedrich Schultz's widow, his 2 sons. They lost a husband and father because we changed things. I wanted to hate myself for that, to feel crushing guilt. And do you?" "I feel sorrow," I said carefully. "Real, genuine sorrow for their loss. But not guilt, not anymore. Because I realized something. In the original timeline, Crawford's wife became a widow, his children grew up without a father. Different people suffered, but suffering existed either way. We didn't create suffering out of nothing. We just shifted which specific individuals bore that burden. Wilhelm absorbed this. That's surprisingly cold logic for someone who risked everything to save lives. It's not cold, I disagreed. It's acceptance. We're not gods who can eliminate all suffering. We're humans who made a choice to act with compassion in a specific moment. The consequences rippled out in ways we couldn't fully predict or control. Some were good, some were bad, most were neutral. But the core of our choice, to try to save lives when we had the power to do so, that was right. That had to be right, or nothing means anything. One of Wilhelm's grandchildren ran over, a little girl with his eyes, holding a flower she'd found in the ruins. She handed it to him solemnly, a gift from the next generation to the man who'd helped ensure they existed. "Thank you, Liebling," Wilhelm whispered, his voice thick with emotion. After the children returned to playing, Wilhelm spoke again. "I've decided to write it all down. Everything that happened. My 45 years trapped in 1942, the others we met, the choice we made at El Alamein. I know no one will believe it. They'll think it's fiction or the ravings of a shell-shocked veteran. But I need to record it. For us. For anyone who comes after." "Lynn's doing the same thing in 2045, I said. "Creating an archive of temporal interventions. She says future time travelers need to learn from our mistakes and our successes." "Are we the first?" Wilhelm asked. "The first to deliberately change history and survive to talk about it?" I shook my head. James Whitmore, the British soldier who appeared with the temporal anchor, he implied there are others, maybe many others throughout history, people who arrived at crucial moments and made choices that changed things. We just happened to be at El Alamein. And if we hadn't been, if we'd remained passive observers, I thought about those 27 faces in the photograph. Then they'd have died, and in some cosmic sense, maybe that was supposed to happen according to the original timeline. But I reject that thinking. There is no supposed to. There's only what happens, and what could happen. We had the power to shift reality toward a better outcome for specific people, and we used it. That's not playing God. That's being human with extraordinary tools. London, England, October 23rd, 1952. 10 years to the day after we'd broken the temporal loop at El Alamein, I stood in a small ceremony honoring the veterans of the North African campaign. Sergeant Mitchell, now a successful businessman, was giving a speech about the battle and its importance. "We lost good men at El Alamein," he said, his voice carrying across the gathering. 13,000 casualties, thousands dead. But we also saved something crucial, hope. We proved that the tide could turn, that the seemingly invincible could be defeated. Every soldier who survived that battle went on to fight at other battles, to help win the war, to come home and build the peace. I saw many of the 27 in the crowd, Crawford with his 3 children. O'Brien with his daughter, now a vibrant 13-year-old. Price, having just returned from diplomatic service in Moscow. They didn't know me. We'd met briefly in the chaos of war, just another displaced person in a displaced world. But I knew them. I knew their lives, their families, their futures, and I knew that in another timeline they'd been dust and memory. After the ceremony, Mitchell found me. He'd aged well, the haunted look from the war replaced by the confidence of a man who'd survived and thrived. "You're that person," he said quietly. "The one from the desert, the time traveler." "I'm surprised you remember," I said. "I've never forgotten. How could I?" He glanced at the veterans mingling around us. "I've spent 10 years wondering if you were real or if I imagined the whole thing. Battle fatigue, you know. The mind plays tricks." "I'm real," I confirmed, and so was everything that happened. He pulled out a small notebook, worn with age. "I wrote it all down. Everything you told me, everything I saw. I've kept it private. Figured people would think I was mad if I talked about time travelers changing World War II. But I needed to know. Did it work? Did you accomplish what you set out to do? I showed him the photograph of the 27 soldiers. These men lived because we acted. That's what we set out to do. At what cost? 3 German soldiers survived who would have died, and they went on to kill 3 British soldiers who would have lived in the original timeline. A scientist we saved made the atomic bomb slightly more powerful, killing 8,000 more people in Japan, but ending the war faster and ultimately saving more lives overall. Small changes rippled through the timeline, creating differences that compound over decades. Mitchell processed this, his businessman's mind calculating odds and outcomes. Net positive. Impossible to calculate definitively, but I believe so. More importantly, we acted with compassion and courage. We tried to reduce suffering when we had the power to do so. The universe is so complex that we can't control all outcomes, but we can control our intentions and efforts. He nodded slowly. That's good enough, I suppose. It has to be. He looked at the veterans again. For what it's worth, those men have lived good lives. Crawford's children are brilliant. O'Brien's daughter wants to be a doctor. Price might be our next ambassador to the United States. You saved more than just their lives. You saved all the good they've done and will do in the world. And all the harm, I reminded him. Crawford divorced his wife in 1949. O'Brien struggles with alcoholism. Price has made diplomatic decisions that hurt people. We saved humans, not saints. Complicated, flawed, real humans. Still worth it? Every time, I said without hesitation. El Alamein, Egypt, November 4th, 2012. 70 years after the battle, I returned to El Alamein for the anniversary commemoration. I'd aged naturally through the decades, living in the timeline I'd helped create, watching history unfold with the unique perspective of someone who'd read how it was supposed to go. The El Alamein War Cemetery was immaculate, thousands of white headstones marking the men who'd fallen in the desert battles. I walked among them, reading names, remembering. In the original timeline, James Crawford's name would have been on one of these stones. Now it was in a different cemetery in Manchester, where he died of natural causes in 2001 at the age of 79, surrounded by children and grandchildren. The butterfly effect of our intervention had grown over 7 decades. Crawford's eldest son had become a climate scientist whose work contributed to early warnings about global warming. His daughter was a human rights lawyer who'd helped refugees across Europe. His youngest son was a musician whose songs had touched millions. None of them knew they owed their existence to a group of time travelers making a desperate choice in 1942. They just lived their lives, made their own choices, created their own ripples. I'd met Marcus here. He'd traveled back from 2025, wanting to see the place where we'd changed everything. He looked good, solid, real, no longer flickering between existence and non-existence. I did the math, he said as we stood overlooking the memorial. Crawford's family line alone. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. There are now 47 people who exist because we saved him. Multiply that by 27 soldiers. Factor in all their descendants and the people those descendants affected. We changed millions of lives, I finished. Maybe tens of millions as the ripples spread. Does that terrify you? Every single day, I admitted. But it also gives me purpose. We have a responsibility to those lives, to keep watching, to keep trying to guide things in positive directions when we can. Is that what you've been doing? All these years living quietly through the timeline? I nodded. Small interventions. Nothing as dramatic as El Alamein. I convinced a young scientist to pursue a specific research direction in 1963 that led to medical breakthroughs. I prevented a drunk driver from killing a family in 1978. I invested in clean energy companies in 1995, helping them grow faster, small acts of temporal gardening, trying to cultivate good outcomes. And the Temporal Reconciliation Project? I'm part of it. There are 37 of us now who've successfully broken temporal loops and survived to talk about it. We meet occasionally, well, as occasionally as beings unstuck from linear time can meet and share strategies for responsible intervention. Marcus smiled. We've become the secret guardians of the timeline. That's either incredibly noble or incredibly arrogant. Probably both, I agreed, but someone has to do it. We have the power and the knowledge. Using it wisely is our burden and our privilege. We stood in silence, watching the sun set over the desert where, 70 years ago, we'd made a choice that echoed through time. Do you ever wonder, Marcus asked quietly, what happened to the original timeline? The one where we didn't intervene? Does it still exist somewhere in the multiverse? Every night, I confessed, I dream about it sometimes. Crawford dying in the minefield. Those 27 soldiers never coming home. The families shattered by grief. That timeline is real somewhere, and those people suffered. We didn't eliminate their suffering. We just created a parallel reality where it was distributed differently. Does that make what we did meaningless? I thought about Wilhelm playing with grandchildren who existed in this timeline, but not that one. About Crawford's climate scientist son, whose work had helped save lives from natural disasters. About all the small kindnesses and large accomplishments of the people we'd saved and their descendants. No, I said finally. It makes what we did exactly as meaningful as every choice any human makes. We shaped our local reality toward compassion and life. Other timelines exist with other outcomes. But this one, this specific branch of the multiverse, is better because of our choice. And that's enough. The last light faded from the desert sky, and I activated my temporal navigator one final time. I'd lived from 1942 to 2012 in linear time, experiencing 70 years of history I'd helped shape. Now it was time to jump forward to see how the next century unfolded in the timeline we'd created. But before I left, I placed a small stone on the memorial, a tradition I'd learned from one of Crawford's descendants, who'd married someone Jewish. The stone represented memory, permanence, the weight of the past. For all the timelines, I whispered. All the choices, all the lives lived and lost. May we remember that every moment is a branch point and every choice echoes into eternity. The rift opened, showing me glimpses of possible futures in our timeline. Some were beautiful, some were terrible, most were a complex mix of human joy and human suffering. We hadn't created paradise by breaking the loop at El Alamein. We'd just created another version of reality, another chance for humanity to struggle and grow and maybe eventually become something better. I stepped through into 2142, 200 years after the battle that changed everything, ready to see what humanity had made of the gift of time we'd given them. Behind me, the desert wind blew across El Alamein, carrying the memories of all who'd fought there. In every timeline, in every version of history, in every choice made and unmade. And somewhere in the multiverse, other time travelers were making their own choices, breaking their own loops, shaping their own realities toward compassion or cruelty, hope or despair. That was the truth about time travel. We were all doing it, every human being, every moment of every day. Moving forward through time, making choices that rippled outward into the future. Some of us just had fancier equipment and could see the consequences more clearly. But the responsibility was the same. To choose compassion when possible, to accept the weight of consequences, and to keep moving forward through whatever timeline we found ourselves in, because in the end, that's all anyone can do, time traveler or not.